This is later Musar. This is Rabbi Nassim Tzvi Finkel of Sabbatki Yeshiva, and you'll see how he uses similar things to the Orchos Tzadikim, which was much earlier, but uses them in a very different way. And this is much more about the greatness of the human being, that we can be inspired to do Teshuvah and to change for the better if we are in touch with how great human beings are, rather than how degraded human beings are. So he says that God brings plagues on Pharaoh to get Pharaoh to change his ways. He says, "Ulam lo kena davar al ha'adam higia lidei tshuva, lo yalidei ha'hakara ba'onshin uv'yisurim shashem mevi alav." He says it's not that way for most human beings. That we do tshuva, we're not supposed to do tshuva through pain. We're supposed to do tshuva al yidei hakara b'chasadim harab, through recognizing the great amount of kindness that God does with the creatures. There's the fact that God has created us, the fact that we're indebted to God, that is the source of tshuva. It's not, fear of sin. It's not, how bad the human being is. It says, "V'lo od," and not only that, "El shemafsik hachesed shel etzem, shemaspik hachesed shel etzem hatshuva." This is a really wild idea. It says, not just by looking at what God does for you, giving you life, giving you a world that you can live in. Not only is that a reason to do tshuva, but he says the kindness of the notion of tshuva itself is a reason to do tshuva, which is fascinating, right? Remember we had last time this idea that tshuva came before the world. So Teshuvah being built into the world, the idea that human beings are not just condemned, but that we have the power in our hands to make things different. That is an unbelievable world to live in. And that God accepts that, even if we have sinned before God. We can even go against the master of the universe, and yet we still have the power to change that. He says, recognizing the kindness, the wonder of tshuva itself will bring us to tshuva. It's a fascinating idea. He says, logically, there really should not be a place for tshuva, for repentance, for return. We have rebelled against God. We have done, what we want to do. Said, would God really forgive us? The rabbis say that there's a midrash that God, before God created the human being, God asked wisdom, if the human being sins, what should be their punishment? And wisdom said, Chataim tirdofra, the wicked chase evil. Shalul nevuah. God asked prophecy, what should be the punishment for sin? Prophecy said, "Hanefesh achotat hitamut," the person should die. But God had a different answer. God said that even though the logical thing, if you ask wisdom, you ask prophecy, those things might be logical, but rather God's opinion was, Soleach. Okay. The person's worried about security. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. So Raka Kadosh Baruch Hu B'Tuva Hagadol B'Chastav Hamerubim Noegim Briyosav Neged Higayon Shel Chachma Nua. God goes against intelligence and forgives those Lashavim, those who return to God. As it says at the end of the Maimar of that Medrash, God said, what do I think? That the person could do tshuva. So he's pointing out from the Medrash that it's not hegioni, it's not logical, the idea of tshuva. The idea that you can do what's wrong and go back, the idea that you can change, as the Gemara says, the past, it's not really logical. It's a great kindness. It's that kind of world that God created. That's fascinating. God instilled it into the world, into the universe. And this was, the Tzaddikim quoted this also. The rabbis say that before God created the world, God created Teshuvah. As the Zohar says, God said to Teshuvah, to repentance, Ana bo'ina lemivre barnash ba'alma. I'm going to create the human being in the world. Amanas dekad yatuvun lach mechuyeveon tavizim lamashve chavenu l'chapar, that the human being could have the capacity to get kapara, to get atonement. Akidekach magia chasto shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu shebara et ha'olam b'tchila amanas kein shnit leviot sheyachtu l'fanav v'efsharas l'shulav. And therefore God instilled Teshuvah first in the world. What does it mean God instilled Teshuvah in the world? I mean God created a world in which, or it's the very nature of the divine, perhaps, that's not over once you sin. The TV hadavar shachote hamakir kamash chasad lifnei Hashem. And nature of the human being is that when we recognize how much we have rebelled against God, and still God is willing to forgive us for our sins. God puts out the divine hand to us, as it were, receive us. So that makes us realize how great God is, and God's chesed, God's kindness, and that will that bends us toward Teshuvah, that prompts us to Teshuvah, to realize that God is open to Teshuvah itself. Prompts us. It's a very interesting idea that he's saying Teshuvah itself is the prompt for Teshuvah. And Zui derech Teshuvah shehi mechovato shel kol asher b'shem Adam chonuv shel nistra binato harigila. Nevertheless, Zui derech Teshuvah shehi mechovato shel kol asher b'shem Adam yachoneh shelo nistra binato harigila. The path of Teshuvah is that everything that is called human is binato harigila. In other words, I think what he's saying is that the logical understanding, we're not bound to logic. He's saying God has created Teshuvah before the world, because once you create the world, Teshuvah doesn't make any sense. The divine says it has to be a certain way. In other words, God created a world with natural laws, right? That's how the divine works. Gravity always goes down, not up. So if God wants us to keep the Torah, wants us to be moral in a certain way, so there would be no violation. There couldn't be. You would not be able to have Teshuvah. In other words, it could only be as God said. So the idea of Teshuvah had to be before the world, because in a certain way it's unnatural. It doesn't fit with the laws of nature. If there are rules, there are rules. But the answer is that that's not the kind of world God made. That itself is so wondrous that prompts us to Teshuvah. So you can see how the Alter is really, he's very psychological, by the way, the Alter. You see this all over the place, and so a lot of times we talk about Musar, it feels very biting Musar, and we think about Musar, we think Sila Yesharim or Chotzarim, the classic Musar works, but it's later Musar that's really very psychological, very based on the greatness of the human being. The Alter of Slobodka, Rabbi, the Alter from Kelm, the Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz. The later Musar is all about, it's much more, fits us better. Talks about Teshuvah also here in another way. He says on Rosh Hashanah, everybody passes before God like sheep. The day that we were created, we stand in judgment. And this why is that? Why is Rosh Hashanah the day we stand in judgment? The answer is it's the day that the first human being sinned and was judged. Adam Adam sinned and Eve sinned by eating from the tree, and they were pardoned. And so that's a fitting day for us to do tshuva. But then he says the first human being did actually a small sin. It was a very small sin. In fact, the angels are very perplexed by why the human being is punished for this. I mean, God said, don't eat the tree, ate the tree. What's the big deal? And even after he's told about death, the angels say, why are you giving him such a bad punishment? And in fact, so if you think about it, though, really Adam's sin caused a fundamental change in the universe. Medrash says, before he sinned, he could see from one end of the world to the other. And now he's just in the garden. He became smaller. The world became smaller. Death came to the world. The truth is, if you think about it, sin caused terrible outcomes. So, and yet God pardoned Adam did not. And so therefore, Medrash says, in the future, the Jewish people, the human beings, will have this day as their day for pardon. So he asked the question, he says, what pardon was there really for Adam? I mean, where's the forgiveness for Adam? I mean, the world was torn apart because of his sin. It seems like it was actually a terrible punishment. It says, he says, before he sinned, he had direct access to God. After he sinned, he didn't. Since he sinned, the Shekhinah went away from the world, the Medrash says. So it was actually a terrible punishment. So why? Why wasn't there more mercy for him? It says, hello, ein lanu dai milim l'tarid omik. Says, Ella af achrei kol yeridas hanafilos. It says, even after Adam caused so much damage, there was so much descent. It says, actually, koach nifla atzur b'kirbo. God actually left Adam with an incredible power. That with it, he could, even though he had been so diminished, he had one thing left, and that is his secret to doing tshuva. That he could fix everything. He could actually once again reconnect with his authentic self, like it was before he had been diminished. What is this magical thing? He says this thing is chai, it's life. The fact that he still exists, the fact that he's alive. And as long as there is life, there's the potential for pardon. That is pardon. Life, the fact that we exist still, one more moment, it is so potent because it means everything can change. He says, the life that he's still alive, that is the great pardon that he gave Adam. That's the great forgiveness, that he's still alive. Because once he's still alive, he can change it. He has the potential to change everything. It's a very interesting idea. It's not that tshuva changes everything. It's that the potential for tshuva, he says, basically existence itself. It's very similar to what he said before. Existence itself is the greatest potential, in a certain sense, the greatest pardon, because it leaves us with potential, with hope, with change, with the possibility for change.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
But do we see Adam actually doing tshuva after
No, we do not see him doing tshuva. That's right. So what does it mean he's saying that God pardoned him? The answer is he's still alive. He has the potential to do tshuva. The potential to do tshuva is, in a certain sense, the greatest gift or the greatest pardon, the greatest mechila, that God didn't take away his possibility for tshuva, that God didn't take away his life. Existence itself is sort of the greatest prerequisite for tshuva. I think that's what he's saying. Now, it's true for many of us who will exist and we're not going to do tshuva. But in a certain way, I think he's saying it was like this amazing gift that God gave Adam, which is existence. And it's similar to what he said before, which is that, tshuva itself is so wondrous, that prompts us to do tshuva. He's saying life itself is so wondrous, has so much potential for tshuva, that itself is like the road to Teshuvah. It's a certain way of seeing life, life as a place that is so such a gift, and so has so much potential. Vem is tikkun Adam Rishon is Kalabria. Hania Einsha. And what did he do, Adam? So he quotes a medrash that Adam gave 70 years to David Hamelech. And from David came Mashiach. And so in a sense, Adam, even though he really didn't, we don't see him doing tshuva, he still had the potential, and he did do this great act. Osher Adam hu achayim, the wealth of the human being, the bounty of the human being is what? Chaim, it's life. B'chaim chiyuto ein ketz ugvul efshruta, because if a person is alive, there is no limit to their possibility, endless hope. But seit b'demus, to leave with pardon, is to be alive. If you are alive, God has pardoned you. And not just because we want to live, but because as long as a person is alive, one is presented with every moment the potential for more, potential for tshuva. So I don't know. I wrote down sort of, is this just the possibility of tshuva, or is he saying more than that life itself somehow prompts us toward tshuva? Or that sense of potential and possibility of while we're alive as human beings, just the potential that we feel for something positive itself perhaps prompts tshuva. So he says that's why in the high holiday service we're always asking for life. Because it's not just that we want to live. That would be sort of pedestrian. It's that we want to live because living is the potency of life. It is the tool for changing things. And we say in Amida, we say all these piyutim. How can we do that? So he says because the books of life and death are open. And it's a sakana, so therefore we're allowed to do it. We have to know. But if a person lives and they forget why, so then the potential doesn't matter. If we don't produce something out of our life, then what really is it? In other words, we have to recognize the potential. That itself is such a gift, or to feel that, but of course we have to follow up. If we don't, then as the Gemara says, the wicked, even in their life, are called dead because they don't produce anything, they don't move forward. Wrote down here. We have to think about the past year. Have we really fixed our midot, our character, in the way we think about the world? Have we utilized the storehouse of life to climb up? Maybe we didn't. Maybe we've just become stuck in sin. That's what we have to think about. Even through a small sin, Tzidkiyahu did a very small sin and he was punished. So then he says, beautiful, this is really him. He says, if a small sin for Tzidkiyahu was over there, he had sworn that he would, here's the Gemara, that he had said to Nebuchadnezzar, who was a bad guy, he took an oath that he discovered Nebuchadnezzar eating a live rabbit. And he said, swear that you won't tell anybody. And he swore to him. And I guess he maybe violated it, something like that. So he was punished. He says, even a small sin, you're punished for. So you could learn from that even a small goodness, how great is the reward? If we fix our actions and our midot even just a little bit, how great is that? Even a Russia becomes like a tzaddik. So he goes in the middle toward, maybe, if you don't do anything with it, you haven't accomplished anything. But then here he says, even just a little bit is tremendous, more than we realize. It's very extremely positive the way that this Musar plays out. Very, very different. It's really the very much about the potential and the greatness of the human being. So that is so it's sometimes we say Musar and people get a little it's amazing to me. I said in the first class that Musar has become popularized, which is very surprising because I never thought it would. Musar I always learned as a kid was always so hard. It's always so it wasn't very positive. It's just about how sinful we are, how many days you should fast for each sin, as we read in the Arch Tzaddikim. But this is very different. I mean, it's very psychological. It's very positive. It's positive psychology. That's he's really and you can actually, it's not in English, but on Safari you can access his what we have his what was written down from him, which is called Or HaTzafun, the hidden light. Because Tzafun is Nussen Tzvi Finkel. So like so so I'll end a little bit early, but I each year I've explored different things during the month of Elul. 1 year we did Rav Kook, 1 year we did philosophy, 1 year. So I decided most of the time I haven't done. And so I had to look a little bit. Obviously, we've only really touched the iceberg. We did a little bit of early Musar, later Musar. And just to show how different they are. We call it all the Musar movement, but really, it's totally different, orientation. And you can read, if you're interested in Musar, there's a lot of modern institute. There's a modern institute called the Musar Institute, which they do classes and they have fellows and they do all kinds of things. They've really sort of adopted classic Musar practice, but obviously they're coming from a much more modern place. Musar has really been reclaimed in recent years. So that's something too. Just, in Judaism, we have all these different areas of thought. And if you focus on only one, the people who say, oh, you have to only learn Gemara, you have to only learn Musar, you have to only learn, so you lose something. Judaism has all of these spiritual tools. Well, K'tiva Ch'tima Tova.
You too, Rabbi.
Shana Tova and good year. And Lee, whoever you are, I'll see you in Shul.
Shana Tova.
All right, Shana Tova.